Hi all, my name's Debbie. I'm a consultant that specialises in learning disabilities and autism. And I just thought I'd share some important information with you today with regarding adaptations for sensory related needs. So that fits in well with what Kirsty was saying. So I'm an independent OT. I am trained in sensory integration and I have worked in both health and the social care sector. I have seen good practice and I have seen bad practice with regarding DFGs and requests for sensory kind of adaptations. So the aims of today really, this is not a sensory integration training session, it's giving you some insight into sensory needs and adaptations and the different terminology really, understanding different sensory environments, different sensory interventions, and when an adaptation for sensory needs might be required. So what do we mean by a sensory space? I thought it would be really important to help the audience understand what is meant by this. Individuals with autism will have complex needs. They won't just have autism. Many of them will have learning disabilities, might have ADHD, challenging behaviour. They will have comorbid secondary conditions alongside all of this, of which sensory processing might also be one of them. Okay, so I guess you've all heard the different terminology. Sensory diet, sensory ladders, sensory integration, sensory stimulation, sensory-based strategies, sensory enrichment. And I'd just like to explain a little bit about what this means. I think it's helpful. The sensory diet, it's not food, it's a prescribed set of sensory related activities prescribed by a trained therapist, usually an OT, but could be a speech and language therapist who's also done that training, or a physio. And it's activities to feed the neurological system. Sensory ladders, you might also have heard this word. This is just another way to describe certain activities to regulate how a person's feeling. The middle of the ladder, you're feeling okay and stable, and sensory activities that you do will keep that equilibrium, that balance. When you're going higher up the ladder, you're not feeling so good and you need to do other activities to bring you back down to the middle rung of the ladder. And the same if you're going lower down onto the lower rungs of the ladder. Again, a ladder will be built with the individual by a trained professional who will recommend certain activities to do. Sensory integration, that's the big buzzword. Sensory integration, also known as AIRS sensory integration, this is undertaken directly with a trained therapist, usually in a clinic setting, and we'll have a little look at what that looks like later. Sensory stimulation is another word, and this just gives reference to example, sand, you could be messing in sand, water tables, exciting boxes with different materials in, the use of fans. It could be anything that provides that sensory stimulation for the individual. Sensory-based strategies might be certain activities that offer calming or arousing kind of fulfillment. This might be certain items or with a specific type of equipment. Sensory enrichment also gives reference to differing sensory experiences, and that usually happens in multisensory environments. And again, we'll talk about that. There's another word that I haven't added to there that's called, we talk about sensory differences, and sensory differences just means any of your sensories might be over or undersensitive, or both at different times, and different senses might have different kind of, they might feel differently, so to speak. So I'm not going to go through all these senses. There's 8 senses. I think we all know we've got 5 in the world of sensory integration. There's vestibular and proprioceptive, and of late, interoception's been introduced. You can see from the slide what each is for. So we do have 8 at your leisure. Have a little look what that means, really. Next slide. So what is a multisensory environment? What is an AIRS sensory integration space, a safe room, and sensory adaptations? Okay, a multisensory environment, sometimes also referred to as a snoozelen. A multisensory environment, it originated in the Netherlands in the 1970s, and it's primarily for stimulating hearing, sight, touch and smell. And the aim really is to create an environment that feels safe and users are given opportunities to explore the space. It'll offer stimulation, relaxation, it'll be therapeutic, and it can promote development. So there's an example of a multisensory environment. And multisensory environments you can create in the bedroom. It's okay to do that, but obviously the user's going to need certain pieces of equipment. Who buys the equipment is another debate. I see the equipment should be purchased in a similar way that we give out commodes, shower chairs, slings, hoists, etc., etc. And that's another discussion. An air sensory integration. It's undertaken in a dedicated therapeutic space, sometimes called a clinic. It's usually with specialist equipment to provide sensory stimulation, and it will only be undertaken with a trained therapist, usually an OT, again, could be a physio or a speech and language therapist. All will have a postgraduate certificate in sensory integration. And sensory integration spaces primarily assist in the development of the vestibular proprioceptive senses. We do work on the others, but this is a big factor in an ASI space. Would we be providing an ASI space in the home? No, I don't think we would, because a therapist would be working with the child to do that. So I wouldn't see that happening in the home. So there's an example of an ASI space. As you can see, there's lots of suspension, swings, soft matting, gimbals. So it's a space to get that kind of vestibular proprioceptive input. A safe space. I'm hoping all of you know what a safe space is. And often local authorities think this is the be all and the end all and the answer to everything. But a safe space really is a large piece of equipment in the home. The home needs the space for it to go into. It can also be used in a school or a respite where somebody might go for respite. And it's designed for adults and children, either or, with complex needs to include autism, epilepsy and behaviour. It does usually have a bed within it, and it's the area ensures there's no risk of entrapment. So it'll hopefully promote sleep, meltdowns, challenging behaviour, epilepsy. And it does offer sensory feedback and relaxation. And the next slide should give you an idea of what it looks like. I think everybody knows what a safe space is. It looks like a very large tent with a mattress in, and you can have soft furnishings in there. You can it's zipped. There's no risk of entrapment. So if you could just have a Google of safe spaces, you'll get to see that. A safe room. Now, I think this is what Kirsty was talking about. This would be somewhere that the individual can undertake activities separate from the rest of the house. It might be to keep sensory equipment in. It's not a storeroom, but it's sensory equipment that's been prescribed that's quite big, so the sensory diet can be facilitated. The size of the room will depend upon the given activities recommended by the OT trained in sensory integration and the equipment used and the frequency. A safe room should not really be the same space as the bedroom. The bedroom should be associated for sleeping. The safe room is likely to do certain vestibular proprioceptive activities that have been recommended by the OT and will need certain pieces of equipment that parents and others can do when the therapist's not around. So some safe room examples, it might need waterproof flooring, robust furniture so it can't be thrown or moved around easily. Might have padded walls, could have some padded flooring. A lot of people get recommended a trampette, and that's a really big piece of equipment to store in your house, to store in your lounge, to store anywhere really. And you might be keeping something like that in there. Larger recommended equipment that therapists might recommend that's used. This is rare, but I do think it can be helpful. Some individuals really will benefit from a suspension point if they are seeking such a lot of vestibular input and it's an unmanageable situation. There are times when they can't go in the garden and swing and get that kind of feeling that they need, and it might need certain certain specific swings to go on it. So I have recommended suspension points in the past, but they are very few and far between. But that's not to say it shouldn't happen and it can't happen. Hidden sockets, gym balls. As well as having a safe room, some individuals benefit from that contained space that we might call a den, or a blackout kind of tent or den. And again, that can be a big piece of equipment to store. So the safe room, the den might need to go into the safe room as well. But I mean, basically, it's the ability to undertake sensory seeking type activities. It might also involve messy play. And I can resonate with what Kirsty said in that, some individuals may become incontinent, might masturbate, spitting, regurgitating, and these rooms need to be, while this presentation's taking place, so it's not spoiling the rest of the house or impacting the rest of the household or those who live in it. Okay, this is sensory adaptations in the home. This is the throughout the home that might be needed, not necessarily a separate sensory room, safe room. And there's quite a long list there, as you can see, but any of those things, and I'm sure there are more. These were some of the things that I've recommended in the past to help the individual and to help the family, really. Okay, so I just thought I'd touch on this because there's a lot of confusion about deprivation of liberty safeguards. Very frequently you get council saying, oh, they can't have that done because that'll be a dole's, or we can't give them a safe space because that'll be a dole's, and we can't put locks on the doors because that'll be a dole's. None of it's a dole's. If you're under 16, parent will be consenting. If you're over 16 and lack capacity to consent to the use of that equipment, then it'll be done in best interest. A dole's is a safeguard. A dole's is there to safeguard the person, not to stop them having equipment to manage their symptoms, their sensory needs, their autism kind of needs. So equipment and adaptations would be considered management of care needs that would fall into dole's kind of legislation. But that's not to say it is a dole's. A dole's, I don't have time to talk about what a dole's is and isn't, but a dole's is an accumulative, lots of things going on, not just one single thing on its own. If you're prescribing the equipment or the space or the locks or the safe space, the person doing the prescribing would be that best interest decision maker, and they'd be able to justify why they've given a certain piece of equipment. So a dole's isn't a safe space is not a deprivation of liberty. If the person can't consent to use it, parental consent, or the person prescribing it for an adult who can't consent. Locked doors aren't. Locking devices away is not a deprivation. Stair gates are not a deprivation. Lap belts have been considered deprivations of liberty. That's not either. CCTV and telecare is not a deprivation of liberty if it's used correctly. And again, it's factoring all these things in. It's better to have all of these things and a person, possibly, or two people watching them 24/7. It's less restrictive. So ultimately, it must be a whole systems approach to enable a comprehensive assessment and informed decision making. Decision makers who are saying no to DFGs and safe spaces and safe rooms, etc., really need to be listening to the people who have assessed and factoring all of that information in, not duplicating. Liaise with all the professionals, obtain the reports, get a GP medical history, and the GP medical history will tell you who everybody who's involved as a starting point. From there, then you can contact all the other people and get that information. Usually, if the person's at this stage, the parents will have all this information gladly to give you. From your own perspective, you don't have to be a sensory integration practitioner to read other people's recommendations. Observe and meet the person. Listen to the caregivers. I'm sure Kirsty wished she'd been listened to, and that would be applicable to paid carers as well. I think you need to understand the different requests. It would be unrealistic for a family to ask for an air sensory integration room. That's not how it works. But it wouldn't be unrealistic for them to ask for a safe space or a safe room if a safe space is not going to work for that person. And I think, importantly, understand the reason for the provision of sensory adaptations, really. And we need to think about the adaptations like we think about giving people with physical disabilities, a grab rail, telecare devices, to help them in the home. We need to think about that for individuals with autism, sensory processing, etc. Okay, so there you go. I think Dave or Paul's just said there is a planned training where we'll get a bit longer to talk about autism and learning disabilities.
There is. Thank you, Debbie. I think there's lots of comments in the chat box. We haven't got time to go through too many of them at the moment, but yeah, I think that there's lots of comments, particularly around the doll stuff and
yeah,
deprivation of liberty.
Yeah, it's a big area, deprivation of liberty, and I can't really say in the in the context of this webinar, but don't be misled by thinking giving a piece of equipment is a doll. It is not.
Yeah, I think for everybody asking that, they should come to your training on the 15th of June. That would be the ideal solution for them, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Deb.